Hello and welcome to the studio. I'm going to show you a little time lapse in a few minutes of the process of painting this painting. But first I'd like to talk a little bit about subject matter. Obviously this is a portrait, but it's a bit different. It's of a gentleman in 18th century costume. He's a military reenactor, and I came across the reference photo for this on Instagram on a site entitled Reds and Revs, and I contacted them via the internet through their website actually, to see if they would be happy for me to use their photographs as reference. Unfortunately, the gentleman I contacted, Alan Ball, was really helpful, and he said by all means, the photographs happened to be taken by him, the ones I was interested in, and so he said, yeah, go ahead, use them, just acknowledge us. So I'm quite happy to do that, and I'll obviously put the acknowledgements in the description. So who is this guy? Well, I'll have to read it out because it's quite a long description, but he's Grenadier Marschall Barenfurt of the Grenadierkompanie, the regiment von Donop from 1776. He's not actually from that time, obviously, but he's a re-enactor. The uniform's that of a grenadier from the regiment of a German auxiliary hailing from Hesse-Kassel, which is an allied state that aided Britain in the American War of Independence. So I quite like the look of these uniforms and the way that they transform the figure. So when you just paint an ordinary portrait, it's often in modern clothing. But the wonderful thing about a lot of these costumes is that they have fantastic headwear and colourful uniforms, quite unlike the military of today, which are more about camouflage and drab colours. Quite often the uniforms of the 18th century were brightly coloured. So red coats, blue coats, green coats, various different colours. And I really liked that. I thought it would make quite an interesting watercolour. And so I'll begin very shortly by showing you just a few sketches I made in my sketchbook. And these led on to then making a more involved drawing of this chap on the watercolour paper. And that's where you'll see the film begin, with me drawing, and there'll be a narrative over the top of it explaining some of the different processes as we go. So I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, please like and subscribe because it really helps develop the channel. But I won't rattle on anymore. I just needed to have this introductory piece because it's a short film and there isn't time to acknowledge everything and everyone who needed to be acknowledged. So without further ado, let's get into the time lapse. So here is Alan's photograph, and as you can see, it doesn't show the top of the hat or the bottom of the uniform, so I've had to improvise some of that. And here's the first sketch I did of it, and there are a few more sketches of some of his other work, and maybe these will become paintings too. These are just initial sketches and obviously need refining before they go to watercolour. So what kit am I using today? I've got my faithful old watercolour tin that I've had since I was a student. It's got Winsor & Newton Artists watercolours in it. And this is the brush set that I've used. A small Winsor & Newton. There's a couple of mop brushes from Jackson's, a flat, a graduate brush and an unbranded round. My initial sketch in the sketchbook wasn't nearly as refined as I would like. It just gave me an idea of what I wanted to do. So I drew it out on the watercolour paper, the size I'd like it to be. And you can see I'm just finishing it off here. I didn't video all that because it tends to be a little bit hard to see. on camera. So I've got the drawing and I've knocked it back a bit with the putty rubber. And so here we are in the time lapse. And I start on dry paper and the initial wash goes in a flesh colour, leaving a little highlight and leaving areas that I want to leave white. That I work into whilst it's still wet, which helps me avoid soft edges, but inevitably it'll dry, and then I have to re-wet areas or work with or into wet washes. So as the portrait progresses, I realise that that eye I'm working on there was slightly too high. Watching it back is really bugging me, but I did correct it later on off camera by carefully wiping away, first wetting, then brushing gently the areas I wanted to remove, and then dabbing with tissue in a process that repeats itself a few times until you remove what you want to remove. It doesn't always work, but I knew I could do it this time, and I managed it quite successfully by repeating the process gently a few times so you don't damage the paper surface, and then you can repaint it. As I say, it doesn't always work, but I knew I could get away with it this time. This is why preparation is so important, getting the drawing right at first. So I'm working on the hat now, and I decided to keep the hat and most of the uniform fairly broadly, almost abstractly painted, so that the face was in more of a detailed state and was the centre of focus. And given that he has this amazing expression on his face, imposing stare, I wanted to emphasise that. And so the background, the hat and the uniform were secondary, and so were handled in a secondary fashion. And that keeps the focal point on the face. And it was also a good way of working because I didn't have any reference really for the top and bottom of the painting. It provided a good solution for dealing with that part of it. So off camera I reworked the background a little bit, corrected the eye as much as I was able to, and generally did a little bit of touching in here and there. And here's the finished article. I hope you like it, I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you found it relatively informative, given that it's not a full tutorial. I'm just talking about some of the processes that I went through to achieve this result. So please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next.